Hello, everyone. Good morning to those who are joining from South Asia, and then the ones who are joining from South East Asia, and then East Asia. Good afternoon. It's good to see you all here today. Hello, everyone. Good morning for those who are joining from South Asia, and then the good afternoon, the ones who are joining from Southeast Asia. And good to see you all here today. ANFREL report launch, and then the panel discussion on Sri Lankan election that happened in 2024. So Sri Lanka have conducted two national elections in 2024, one presidential election and one parliamentary election. So ANFREL is one of the election international election observer group that observe both elections on the ground. So ANFREL observers were there all across the country for both elections, covering different districts, provinces, talking to different election stakeholders. ANFREL also published its interim reports for the both elections, but today it's a time to release our comprehensive full report on both elections. Thank you very much for joining with us. Before we start the launching today, I would like to invite two of our speakers for the first half of this launching. So we'll have two parts. The first part we will launch two reports. We will also reveal our key findings on both elections took place in Sri Lanka in 2024. And then afterwards, we will move on to the panel discussions with the civil society and citizen observer groups. And also we have one speaker joining with us from National Human Rights Council in Sri Lanka. So, without taking much time, let me introduce Brisa Rosales. She is the executive director of ANFREL. Hello, Brisa.
Hi, Sarindu. Good
Hi,
morning and good
Brisa.
afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. I think so. I would like to invite you to like do the welcome remarks to welcome everyone. And floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, again, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Ayubawan, of course, on behalf of the Asian Network for Free Elections, on behalf of the Executive Council, I'm truly honored to welcome each and everyone to the official launch of our two reports. Actually, one coming from the Sri Lanka Presidential and Sri Lanka Parliamentary Elections. And thank you for taking time to join us today. This launch marks an important milestone, and that's not only for ANFREL, it's for everyone who continue to believe in and work toward genuine, transparent, and inclusive elections. So this reports actually it will reflect the dedication and collaboration of so many individuals and organizations, and some of whom are here with us today in the panel discussion. And primarily, this report is dedicated to the people of Sri Lanka, especially to all of the voters and citizen observers whose quiet courage, resilience, and belief in the democratic process serve as well as a sense of hope. And the tireless work in upholding electoral integrity and pushing for reforms, it is not just inspiring, it is vital to the future of democracy in this country. So, as citizen observers, we conclude the mission with optimism and resolve, knowing that real work lies ahead in the advocacy, in the reforms, and in the changes that we all hope to see. So, right now, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge honestly the delays that we face. because for the past several months, we struggled with civil society operation constraints that halted our ability to launch this report in a very timely manner. And these challenges actually it tested our patience, our resolve as an organization, as part of the Secretariat of ANFREL, but it also reaffirmed our commitment. And we're here today because we believe that this work matters and because we are sustained by the support and solidarity of our partners all throughout or across the region who never lost sight of the importance of this mission. So, to the Election Commission of Sri Lanka, we thank you for your cooperation and engagement. To our ANFREL members, PAFREL and CMEV, of course, your continued partnership has been very, very critical. And to our partners, of course, to IRES, TISL, CAFE, hashtag Generation, and all of the civil society actors who engage with us. Thank you for your openness and for contributing to the success of this mission. And today's program, apart from Dr. Manjesh Rana, who will be representing ANFREL and who will be presenting our findings for both of the elections, this discussion is enriched by our panel of distinguished experts and advocates. So we are actually grateful to be joined by Ms. Apekshe of PAFREL, Mr. Tosita of CMEV, Joy of Hashtag Generation, Dr. Gehan of the Human Rights Commission, and of course Manjula of IRES. So each of you brings not only expertise, but also a strong voice for change. And we thank you for your sharing your time and insights with us. So as we present our key findings and recommendation, I encourage all of us to reflect not only on what went wrong or what went right, but on what we can do next together. Let's continue this important work with honesty, urgency, and collective resolve. So thank you, and once again, welcome to this launch and panel discussion. So back to you, Taringdu.
Thank you very much, Brisa. So now then it's time for us to release our report. ANFREL, as Brisa has mentioned, it's the tireless work of a lot of different election stakeholders, not just only ANFREL. So it's time for Dr. Manjesh Rana. He's the Senior Program Officer for International Election Observation in ANFREL. So it's time to release our two reports, two very important reports. Also now onwards, it will be available in our website, anfrel.org. So you can download, you can read the reports. Also, you can give our comments, your comments to our report as well. So it's time for you, Manjesh.
Thank you so much, Tharindu. Am I audible? Okay, so
Yes.
here we go. I just shared on the screen the two reports. The first report, as you can see on the left, titled Resilience and Democracy, Strengthen Electoral Processes and Post-Crisis Sri Lanka, because these were the elections which happened soon after the economic crisis and the revolution which had been going on the streets of Sri Lanka. And that also marks the importance of these elections. And the second back-to-back elections that we had in November. So this is the second report of ANFREL, Democratic Renewal, Sri Lanka's Path Forward. So we would also like to congratulate Sri Lankan voters and all the stakeholders for successfully conducting these two elections. And I have been given this difficult task. You know that both the reports are like of around 250 pages, but I have to sum up the key findings and recommendations in just 10 to 12 minutes. So I'll be very quick and I'll be very brief. So first, I think before touching up the findings, it's important for us to have a little background about the two missions. So I'll first take you through the key focus areas of the mission. So for both the missions, the key focus areas included to check or to monitor the compliance with the constitutional and legal framework, We also monitored the campaign environment that includes money politics like vote buying or vote selling, and also any potential electoral violations that happened during the campaign period. Another key focus area was the misuse and abuse of state resources. So this was something which was quite common during the presidential elections, but it kind of subsided or it kind of reduced when we came to the parliamentary elections. Then another important focus area was this new campaign finance law that was introduced in Sri Lanka for the presidential elections, and we also monitored the enforcement or implementation of the campaign finance law as well. Then another key focus area was the role of media as well as social media, because as we noticed, as we observed, a lot of campaign actually happened on the social media and not on the streets of Sri Lanka this time. So how social media shaped voting behavior and how it ensured information integrity. So that was one of the key focus areas of the missions. And then at last but not the least, we also looked at the accessibility part and the representation of minority as well as vulnerable sectors. So let me also take you through some of the important stats for both the missions. So I'll first take up the presidential elections. So we had, again, it was an expert mission. So it was not a very big mission that we had. It was a short mission. And we had around 12 international observers who interviewed around 300 stakeholders for like around 12 days, and they visited 16 cities which were spread across 8 provinces of Sri Lanka. So this is what we could cover. And on the election day, these 12 international observers could cover around 147 polling stations. And the rural urban division was also quite balanced, because we wanted the data to be good representative of like the entire Sri Lankan population. So we had 74 rural polling stations and 73 urban polling stations. Coming to the parliamentary elections, this was much bigger mission compared to the presidential elections, and here we had both long-term observers who were with us from the starting, and then a few short-term observers who joined at the end, like just before the elections. So together we had around 30 international observers with us for this important mission, and these 30 international observers could interview around 600 stakeholders throughout the mission. And we were also happy to cover all the 22 electoral districts of Sri Lanka. On the voting day, we visited 485 polling stations, and that again includes 265 rural polling stations and 220 urban polling stations. So, of course, ANFREL's observers as well as the organization always follow the international standards and principles. So we adhere to international standards, and this includes the Declaration of Principles for International Election Observation, the Declaration of Global Principles for Non-Partisan Election Observation, as well as the Model Commitments for Advancing Genuine and Credible Elections. Other than that, ANFREL also have their own code of conduct. And together, all of these principles and all of these declarations ensured impartiality, objectivity, and transparency throughout both the missions. So I'll now start sharing some of the important findings, observations, and then I'll also move to the recommendations part. So to begin with, again, we would again like to congratulate Sri Lankan, because again, it was a very high level of engagement, not just by voters, but also by electoral authorities, civil society organizations, and all the other stakeholders. And it definitely reflects the collective commitment to ensure genuine and credible elections in Sri Lanka. And it was also the need of the hour, because again, it was a very difficult time for Sri Lanka since 2022, and I would say it's a very good model, and there are so many lessons to learn from Sri Lanka. In 2024 elections, it witnessed around 80% voters turnout, and that definitely reflected the strong public engagement. And because again, they were given an important task, that is to determine Sri Lanka's leadership amid the ongoing economic crisis. But the 2024 parliamentary elections did see some drop, and the voter turnout dropped to 65%. Maybe because voters had already seen this change in the presidential election, and it actually happened too soon. But nevertheless, it also marked another significant milestone in Sri Lanka's democratic journey. These were some of the critical areas for improvement that ANFREL observed. While at large the elections were peaceful, and we would also like to say this, that the elections were also well managed by the Election Commission of Sri Lanka. But our observations throughout both the missions also highlighted critical areas for improvement, and that includes the challenges in the enforcement of electoral laws, the instances of misuse and abuse of state resources, gaps in voter education, accessibility issues, especially for the marginalized communities and vulnerable groups, and there were also some groups which were disenfranchised. Then the media imbalances, so there were some issues with regard to ownership of the media, or how equal space media could provide to all the presidential candidates and later to the parliamentary electoral candidates. Then disinformation was again a major problem, especially on the social media, which is highly complex and very difficult to manage. And then there were also barriers to women's and minority representation. And noticeably, during the presidential election, out of 38 candidates which finally contested on the election day, there was not even one single woman candidate. So let's take this first issue, the campaign finance law. So again, it was a very important law, and this particular election, that is the presidential election, also marked the first real test of the newly implemented campaign finance law, which is known as Regulation of Election Expenditure Act number 3 of 2023, in short, RIA. So while it was definitely a positive step forward, it was introduced in Sri Lanka for the first time. Lots of CSOs actually worked hard to push for this law, and there was a long judicial battle, and it was the final result of that. But it definitely faced implementation challenges, maybe because it was for the first time, and there were lots of flaws that ANFREL also noticed. And we also observed that there were some issues with regard to the unclear guidelines. There were also some loopholes which kind of benefited candidates, or there were also delays in enforcement. So ANFREL would like to recommend, some of the important steps, as in how exactly we can improve this law. So to begin with, again, it's important to start early. So it's important to enforce it from the election declaration to cover all expenses. That is, we need to go beyond the campaign period so that we can cover the day since the time the election has been declared. Then there is also a need to define clearly the do's and don'ts. So it should clearly list what are the allowed campaign materials and what are the spending categories, because as of now the law doesn't really specify any categories or any list. So that is one of the loophole. So it gets very difficult to track it down. So it's also important to track this in real time. So election commission must make use of digital tools to monitor campaign finances live, and so that there can be real time updates, and it is not something that needs to be done once the elections are over. So the updates also need to come up regularly. So there is a need to review the law, and again, with the help of all the CSOs, all the CSOs and all the organizations need to be on the same table, and we also need to be positive to adapt the new challenges, the new learnings, the new lessons, and ensure transparency. Moving on, abuse of state resources, or ASR. Again, it was one of the major issues, especially in the presidential election. And the instances includes the government vehicles usage for the elections, as well as the use of public officials. And there were also some instances where ANFREL observed rushed public projects by the incumbent president back then. So all of these issues, again, it raised significant concerns about the fairness. But when you compare the presidential election with the parliamentary election that happened after 2 months, so relatively in the parliamentary election, ANFREL observed lower number of reports related to ASR, perhaps because the government was very new, perhaps because there were lots of MPs which were not really repeated, which were not really contesting again. So there could be a number of factors, but when you compare the two elections, it was definitely on the lower side when you look at the parliamentary elections. So while the Election Commission took steps to address these abuses, but again there were stronger enforcement mechanisms which were needed. And ANFREL recommends that again there should be a clear definition. So it needs to be clearly defined what are the prohibited uses of state resources. There should not be any ambiguity. There should not be any confusion with that, and that includes, the use or abuse of officials, as well as there should be some guidelines regarding how the president needs to conduct themselves, especially during the parliamentary elections. Then another important point is to prioritize action on high profile cases and update the public regularly about it. So again, keep the communication regular, keep the communication uniform, keep the communication constant. Another important recommendation is to build capacity. So there is a need to strengthen the election commission itself. It needs to be given more teeth. There is a need to strengthen police as well, and the civil society organization also needs to be strengthened so that they can collect evidence and they can ensure prosecutions. And finally, there is also a need to monitor the abuses or the misuses of state resources systematically, not just like immediately before the election or during the campaign period, but much before that. So we also need to, like being a monitoring organization, the domestic as well as international organizations, they also need to expand their scope and they need to go beyond just the elections time, and they need to track the state resources misuse long term. So moving on to the next important issue, again, media independence and access to information was another important issue observed by ANFREL. So this was in fact one of the key concerns in the presidential elections, and we observed biased media coverage, and this was also observed by some of the local CSOs and organizations as well, like Sri Lanka Press Institute. As we can see on the screen, there is this pie chart, and we can see that this data reflects the first 2 weeks of campaigning. And during this time, during the first 2 weeks of the campaign period, 43% of coverage by the state media was given to the incumbent president, Ranil Wickremesinghe. And this was followed by Sajit Premadasa, 23%, and then 12% to Anura Kumara Disanaike. So we can see how state media was biased towards the incumbent. So other than state owned outlets, the privately owned media also supported the candidates with financial ties to their companies. So we also observed that it's also important to track down who owns which media house, and we could easily identify which media house is supporting which particular candidate. So it was basically the money game, it was basically the financial ties that they had, and this was one of the major concerns. While this issue of state media bias, again, compared to the parliamentary elections and presidential election, when you compare the two elections, it lessened during the parliamentary election, but similar patterns of favoritism, especially in private media, persisted. And here are some of the ANFREL's recommendations: that it needs to ensure equal coverage guidelines. It needs to ensure fair airtime allocation. So election commission need to step up. It needs to secure and distribute equal airtime, and it needs to ensure equal media coverage. Then it's also important that there is no conflict with regard to who owns which media setup. So it's important that media must publicly disclose the ownership ties or political affiliations with candidates. And at the end, it's important to ensure that all the media houses follow or adhere to the media ethics and self-regulations. Then another important concern was misinformation and disinformation. So this was majorly on the platforms like Meta, TikTok, and YouTube, and it further rose confusion through false opinion polls. And we also witnessed lots of AI generated content like fake video of American President Donald Trump supporting one of the candidates, and then fabricated opinion polls and election results as well. So this was the constant issue which ANFREL observed, and we recommend that there should be stricter media regulations. And with the efforts of Election Commission of Sri Lanka with regard to voter education, this needs to be expanded, and they need to cover the media consumption and misinformation as well, and they should make some positive efforts to promote digital literacy. Then again, it is also important to ensure transparency and fact checking through collaborative initiatives. The Election Commission should collaborate with organizations like Hashtag Generation. So it's also important to collaborate with them and to collaborate with many more domestic organizations to ensure that this is something which is done throughout the election cycle, and the instances should not be covered in isolation manner. So they also need to increase the monitoring of online platforms to prevent any kind of manipulation. Then another issue was disenfranchised groups. There were several eligible voter groups in Sri Lanka, and they remained disenfranchised, as ANFREL noticed. And the main reason was the systematic barriers. And these groups include the remand prisoners, even though they are allowed to vote, but there was no infrastructure to support their voting. Overseas citizens, again, they are one of the biggest contributors to Sri Lankan economy, but when it comes to elections, they were not included in the exercise. Then Bikunis, so again, NIC or the National Identity Card is one of the major issues which they face, since they don't have that, and it's one of the requirements to be a voter. So they are also not eligible to vote. And other than these, we also had essential service staff and the employees in free trade zones, which faced some systematic barriers, and they couldn't really participate in this exercise. So ANFREL recommends both Election Commission as well as Parliament that they should establish clear procedures to allow eligible prisoners to vote, and Parliament should also enact laws enabling advance and overseas voting. And regarding Bikunis, it's important that Election Commission, Buddhist Affairs Department, and the other departments, they resolve the NIC-related barriers and the other barriers for them. And then in the end, for the essential service staff or the employees in free trade zones, it's important to introduce advanced or flexible voting options. Looking at some of the important election day concerns, again, we observed around 147 polling stations during the presidential elections and around 485 polling stations during the parliamentary elections. And our observers had some really important quantitative and qualitative findings. So we also observed lack of accessibility. So it was very difficult for persons with disabilities as well as people who were elderly to participate in this exercise because of infrastructural issues and hurdles. So ANFREL observed that only 17% of the polling stations or had the facility of ramps, and only 25% of the polling stations were wheelchair accessible during the presidential elections. And similarly, for the parliamentary elections, only 25% or one-fourth of the polling stations had ramps, and only 22% of the polling stations were wheelchair accessible. Looking at another issue, voter information desk, which is usually the first source of information when a voter enters the polling station. So only around one-third polling station had such desks during the presidential elections. And this was also one of the recommendations that ANFREL gave during its interim report. And we could also see that partially implemented, because we also observed that in parliamentary elections, this number improved to 60%. Another important concern was ballot secrecy concerns. So we observed that around 27% of polling stations during parliamentary elections had some secrecy concerns, and it was majorly because of the flaw of how the layout has been designed of the polling station. I'll show you a picture as well later. And other than this, there were some major concerns, including like ANFREL observed that 14% of the polling stations were situated at religious sites, majorly Buddhist temples, and some of them were also located in the churches. And this is not a very good practice, because we need to separate politics or elections from religion. So again, it's not a very good practice, and we need to ensure that this is not repeated in the future elections. Then the presence of armed police. So again, this can also be very intimidated when you see a police personnel inside the polling station with AK-47 or some other gun. So this is also not a good practice. Other than that, ANFREL observed that there were lots of polling officials as women, but unfortunately, when it comes to leadership positions, only 4% of senior presiding officers were women out of all. And majority of counting centers, because we also observed the counting processes, so we observed that majority of counting centers lacked space, and which created very unhealthy conditions, and it was very suffocating, it was very chaotic at the counting centers as well. So this is also something which can be improved. So I'll just take you through some of the pictures now. So as we can see, it was not very accessible, especially to persons with disabilities and elderly, and also I think to normal people or to perfectly healthy voters. I think this is not the best practice when you follow for a polling station. And most of the polling stations we observed had these staircases. Some of them had like hundreds of staircases to climb. So again, it was one of the major hurdles that ANFREL observed. This was a positive step because Election Commission introduced this pilot project, and they issued these cards that also specify specific disability to the persons with disabled. And even though the pilot project covered only 5,000, and an overwhelming majority were left out of this exercise, but again, it's a good starting point, and we sincerely hope that it is covered, and all the persons with disabilities are covered in this exercise. So this is one of the religious sites which also served as a polling station. We could also see the security personnel, and many of them were also kind of trying to manage the queues. So again, this is also something which can be very intimidating, and it's not the best. And you can also see the gun. So I think especially with minorities, it can be a problem where there is a history of violence. This is the arrangement of a polling station. This is the official layout shared by Election Commission. So as we can see that the ballot paper marking compartment or the booths, they are facing the senior presiding officer. And we also physically observed this in the polling stations, that even the voters could easily access it. Like the voters which are not voting or which have already voted, they can easily see or they can easily breach the right of secrecy of the voter who's casting his or her vote. So this is again not a good practice, and this can easily be resolved by just shifting the layout or changing the layout. So I think that's all from my side. And of course, there is a lot more to the report. It was not really possible for me to sum up all the findings and recommendations. I also must highlight that, when it comes to recommendations, we have specific recommendations for each of the authorities. Like we have specific recommendation for the parliament, we have specific recommendation for election commission, or to CSOs, or to monitoring organizations, to media, to social media. And when it comes to recommendations, we also had them divided into short-term recommendations, which can be implemented for the next election cycle. And we also realized that there are certain recommendations which need longer time. So we also stated that clearly, and there is lots of other qualitative and quantitative findings as well as pictures in the report. So we sincerely hope that the reports are useful, and we bring the necessary change, or we help Sri Lanka bring in the important reforms in the future elections. So thank you so much. And I would just also want to acknowledge that for both the reports, other than me, for the presidential election, Vidya Lakshmi was also one of the co-authors, and she was one of our electoral analysts. And for the second report, that is for the parliamentary report, we had Mr. Carlos Africa with us. And we thank both of them, because it's only because of this team effort that the final reports could come on time, even though there was some delay in release. But we are happy to finally share it with you. Over to you, Tharindu. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Manjesh Rana. Yes, and also taking the task of summarizing, like hundred of pages into a very short presentation. I think the people who really wants to see the detailed information so that you can access through our website. The both reports are available right now with the analysis and also the recommendations as Manjesh has mentioned earlier. Thank you very much for the briefing, the key findings and the recommendations. And I think with this, we can move to our discussion. So that's also provide a good base start our discussion. Without taking more time, let me introduce today our panelists for the discussion. So we will talk about the Sri Lanka's full electoral cycle and also more on the reflections that we can take from the last two national elections in Sri Lanka. Apart from those two national elections, the last month also Sri Lanka has conducted the local election. So the three elections were pretty much close to each other. But here, I think we will more focus on the two national elections that took place in 2024, and then discuss about more what we can do at the end of the day to make next election cycle in Sri Lanka better. Right. Let me first introduce our first panelist today, Miss Upekshi Fernando. She is the program manager of People's Action for Free and Fair Elections, PAFREL. When you say PAFREL, everybody knows the organization. That's one of the oldest election observer group, not only in Sri Lanka but also in Asia. PAFREL has been observing elections since 1989, as far as I remember. So thank you very much, Upekshi, for joining with us.
Okay.
Um,
Um, I hope this is audible.
yes,
Yes,
we
right?
can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So,
And let me introduce the other panelists as well, so then we can get into the discussion. We also have Mr. Tusita Pereira. He is the Deputy Chief Operations Officer at CMEV. CMEV stands for Center for Monitoring Election Violence. In mid 90s, CMEV started as a group that observe election violence, but when it comes to last couple of decades, CME, we also have observed the other part of the election cycle and also more comprehensive observations with a lot of contributions to the reforms that took place in last couple of decades in the country. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the discussion, Tusita. And also, I would like to introduce next Mr. Joy Jagathan. He is the social media specialist from the Hashtag Generation. Hashtag Generation is an organization that mostly observe and monitor the online space in Sri Lanka. But when it comes to election, also Hashtag Generation is very much focused on the electoral process and monitoring what's happening in this online space, which is very much influential when it comes to the final outcome of the elections nowadays. Welcome to the discussion. Thank you very much for joining with us today. And also, let me introduce Dr. Jehan Gunatilaka. He is the Commissioner and Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. The Human Rights Commission also has been um, making recommendations, working with the reform groups when it comes to for the election reforms in the country. And also he will also bring a lot of human rights angle when it comes to the election. So we are happy to have you today in this discussion. Welcome, Dr. Jehan. And last but not least, we have Mr. Manjula Gajanayaka. He's the executive director of the Institute for the Democratic Reforms and Elections Electoral Studies, IRES, well-known electoral advocate in Sri Lanka. So when it comes to election discussions, we cannot leave Manjula out. Thank you very much, Manjula, for joining with us today in this discussion. So we have the full panel with Dr. Manjesh today. I think Manjesh also can join us time to time, like sort of giving more reflections about ANFREL observation mission and then what we have really seen on the ground. Let me move to Upekshi at the beginning, because PAPFREL is one of the leading organizations who observe not just like last electoral cycle, but also many other electoral cycles in the country. So what are the key takeaways from PAFREL when it comes to last two electoral cycles? And also, what is the PAFREL's priority when it comes to reforms in the country for if we look at the next electoral cycle in Sri Lanka?
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting Pafra, Tarindu, and Amfra. So, key takeaways from the previous elections, as you rightly said, that we are after another election, local government elections, but we are focusing on the key findings what we have for the presidential election as well as the parliamentary elections. In the presidential elections, the findings and the key lessons, what I'm going to say, is coming from the grassroots observations that we have made. As you rightly said, for the presidential election, more than 4,500 observers were there for PAFRA, and for parliamentary elections, it was 5,000, more than 5,500 ground level observers were giving us inputs. And what I'm going to say is the insights and the lessons that we are taking from those observations. So let me give my brief presentation regarding 5 points, and some of the points are overlapping with the other panelists, but let me be very brief on that. The post-election, the postponing of the elections, as you rightly said in your introduction, of course, we had back-to-back elections, but we cannot forget the fact that we had a long period of time that in our country, the elections were postponed. The provincial councils were postponed and the local government was postponed. And these elections, these two elections are very important because this is the first election that the Sri Lankans are faced. They faced after COVID, as well as Easter attacks and the Aragale. So after a government change, this is the first time after a long time that they have exercised their franchise. So even before the elections were declared, there was a quote and unquote, there was attempt by the government, then the governing party, to postpone the presidential elections. PAFREL, as well as the other stakeholders, has to intervene, legal interventions, one after the other, to have the elections on time. So after that, yes, we did have the elections. So getting out of that, we are calling for an election calendar where the elections should be timely as well as free and fair. So that is the first takeaway that we are proposing, that we have to have an election calendar in this country. So then we move on to the election declaration and the campaign period. And on that campaign period, as Dr. Rana clearly mentioned, we have seen, especially in the presidential election, we have seen an unprecedented amount of use of state resources. So on that point, what we are proposing is to empower the election commission, as Dr. Rana said, give the election commission more teeth, where the election commission can impose their authority and have a level ground. Yeah. And then when we compare this election, especially the presidential election, we have a reduced number of violence and violations of election law on the streets. But it has moved on to the cyberspace. So, misinformation, disinformation, violence against female candidates in the parliamentary elections were observed, which was a new tendency with comparison to the previous elections. So, then we have to look for the election reforms to curb these new tendencies and to have a free and fair election and a level ground, so all the candidates have a equal playing field. So on that topic, the media engagement, as your report clearly mentioned, the media guidelines can be more specific, more imposing, where the social media, especially during the cooling period, where we observed a continuation of sponsored campaigns even after the campaign period was clearly over. So the election reforms has to be more rounded and more upgraded, where the new tendencies can be monitored as well as stopped. Then, for the first time, we had campaign finance limitation law during the presidential election and the parliamentary election. So clearly we tried to coordinate with the election commission as well as with each other. Since TISL is not represented in this panel, I have to say that they led the Chandasali Mitre initiative. We have a lot of lessons from there. We do have a fresh law, but to observe that and to impose that to the candidate, we have a long way to go. And we have to be creative, we have to be coordinated. And civil society as well as the election commission has a role to play. And of course, the election, the law itself has to be more detailed, more comprehensive, especially with regards to the social media campaigning. But as it is, we do have a law. So it is important that in the future elections, the civil society, especially the domestic observers, coordinate with the election commission. And the election commission would rely on the crowdsourcing as well as the election observers. And then the voter disenfranchisement, as Dr. Rana clearly said, on the election day, because of the polling station placements, there were disenfranchisement, especially to the elderly, pregnant women, as well as the disabled. And then we don't have an advanced voting system. Only a system we have is the postal voting, which is very limited to the government officials who are actively on work on the election day. So we are advocating for more comprehensive, more inclusive advanced voting advanced voting laws. Hopefully, in the next election cycle, we would have something. So we can also vote as the election observers. Yeah. And then I just want to mention, you have shown the permanent disabled ID card. That was an initiative that was a collaborative with Election Commission and PAFREL. As you had correctly said, we have already issued not 5,000, it is more than 10,000 sample. It was a pilot project. Hopefully, the authorities will take on that responsibility to get the disabled voters their much warranted accessibility on the election day. So then I move on to the second counting, which we did not, we have never observed that phenomenon ever in Sri Lanka, where we had a kind of a limbo where the first count was over, but the results were not yet released officially, and there was a blockage of media. What I'm going to propose here is more open communication by the authorities, more timely communication, where we have been lucky not to have a open anarchy on the streets during that 3-hour period. So the Election Commission as well as the incumbent government has to step in because we do not have a caretaker government in our country. So it is the responsible of the incumbent government to take control of the situation, not to favor themselves, but to keep the democracy, keep the security, keep everyone safe. So that after that point, the vote education, where, of course, compared to the other Asian countries, we do not have a huge percentage of spoil votes, or the voters are coming in good percentages. Especially, we have seen that in the presidential election as well as the parliamentary elections, but we could do more. And of course, the voter education has to go beyond elections. It has to be a citizens' observation where the citizens themselves has to monitor the activities and then actively be involved in the governance processes in every step of the way. Okay, I think I have covered all my points within the time period. If there are any questions, I'm here to answer that.
Thank you very much for your reflections from the last two elections, and also I would like to request for those who are joining online with us. So you also have an opportunity to ask your questions. So we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions to ask from these panelists, you can just comment below the whatever the social media handle that you are joining with us. So later we will ask those questions from the panelists. So next, let's move to Mr. Tusita Pereira. Um, Coming from the CMEV, we have seen in 80s or early 90s, even early 20s in Sri Lanka, the elections were very much violent. But if you look at the last couple of electoral cycles, we have seen less violence when you compare with the past. So, but I think the challenge that we have in front of us today is how to sustain these kind of developments. So, as a CMEV who really like into the election violence and then monitoring the violence, what is your take when it comes to sustaining these trends that we are seeing in the country right now?
Thank you very much, Tarindu, and thank you so much for the ANFREL team for having invited CMEV here. We are really honored to be part of our report launch. And with regards to what you've asked, what you've raised, it is true. I mean, it's CMEV's perspective on the historic reduction of election-related violence in Sri Lanka. I think it's hard won, and it is actually a fragile achievement. It's our view that although direct forms of violence, physical forms of violence may be reduced, diminishing, but structural forms of violence exist, and if some of you might have noticed that during the last election, during the local government election, the CMEV had to lodge complaints against the Excellency, the President, the Prime Minister, in their conduct during the last the electoral campaign process. And it's the same. I think Dr. Rana very aptly addressed the issue of the locations of and this the suitability of certain polling centers, which I think it's also important that the Elections Commission look at from a structural kind of perspective. But also we've seen over the I think Joy would actually expand more on this, but the what we see as the digital forms of violence that we've experienced during the presidential election, and also in a wider scale during the general election, especially against the women candidates. So all these, I think, are really important for us to focus on. But again, sustaining this, we have actually managed progress, and in terms of sustaining these progresses, I think we would require a multi-layered, a proactive approach from across the board from all the electoral stakeholders. And on this, the CMEV would like to propose a few key points. I think considering the time constraints, I would like to be very quick. One of the few things that we'd like to propose is the institutionalizing and expanding of preventive mechanisms. This is very important, especially in terms of early warning and rapid response mechanisms. And I think it is what's really important is to institutionalize these and to fund them as permanent kind of part of the electoral landscape. And this is more in terms of the provincial and local government elections, because this historically, this is where the more violence is prone to take place. Another is the strengthening of the independence and the capacity of the Elections Commission. I think we can discuss more on this later. Political parties, holding political parties accountable it's also a key aspect. We have the campaign finance law. There's also this culture of accountability that's building up in a really nascent way among political parties. But again, when it comes to provincial and local government elections, this is something that really need to establish and strengthen. Improving voter education and empowerment. We've seen like recent developments. For example, the Elections Commission proposed this application, which I think is a really good start in terms of bringing in different kinds of complaint processes and even report violations anonymously. On this, I think we would like to, the CMEV would like to emphasize the role of youth and women, especially the up and emerging digital kind of citizens. And also, I don't know how far we can go on this, but strengthening the monitoring of digital spaces, which is really important for us. And this should be done in a real time scale. Monitoring social media narratives is really important, and also how we can navigate engagement with tech platforms, and also even when it comes to taking down content. The protocols are not really clear. This is something we would like to see the Elections Commission to address, and also countering incitement. We've seen during the general election and also the recently concluded local government elections where regional actors or even local level kind of incitements happening. It never cascaded to a national level, but doesn't mean that in the future it might happen or not. And lastly, I think we would like to see continued civil society monitoring and from a very as CMEV has throughout our history of suggested that it has to be done in a very independent and real-time monitoring, and I think these are the few things that we would like to emphasize. But also, I would like to say that that we should focus more on credible elections monitoring through evidence-based monitoring and advocacy and collaboration. I think this is where we are quite happy for our strong relation and continued relations with ANFREL. I think I'll leave it there. Maybe we can come back to what I've said and to expand more during the question and answers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your yeah, words. And yes, I think like you rightly mentioned, like in Sri Lanka now we see the physical violence has been reduced over the years, but there are structural violences still persist, right? And especially when it comes to uh, the online space that we are talking about. So I would like to bring joy to the discussion with that, because hashtag generation is one of the organization that particularly monitoring this the online space with regards to the elections, and also apart from the elections, during the other narratives building and then everything. So how do you think, Joy, when it comes to especially particular to the election, right? Like nowadays, um, the social media space and then the online space is very much important than it used to be in the past. So it's very influential. So there we can see the narratives are building even a couple of years before the elections, that leading to the elections, and also this misinformation, disinformation issues. How do you think that we can leverage this online platform to improve the election integrity, but not to undermine the integrity of the election process?
Yeah. So thank you so much, Tarindu, and the team and ANFREL for having me here. So first, let me give you like a brief introduction to the methodology that we used for our monitoring. So here we monitored three main aspects, three main narratives on social media during both the parliamentary and the presidential election. So first we monitored harmful narratives on social media, and then the second one is the violations against the election law of Sri Lanka, and then the third one is the violations against the media guidelines. So here we have observed a lot of content, a lot of different narratives, new narratives that are very relevant to the current political scenario of the country. And also we have observed new trends and uh, new observations that are unseen in most of the reports and stuff like that. So here, like when we monitor harmful narratives on social media, we monitor hate speech, disinformation, harassment, and then organized advocacy of violence. So these are main four categories that we observed under harmful narratives on social media. So here's during the presidential election, we observed less hate speech, but in the parliamentary election, the general election, we observed a lot of hate speech against Muslim community, and then Tamils, and then the people in the north and east part of the country, and also we observed a lot of hate speech against caste, particular caste in Tamil community. So, for example, in the east part of the country, Mr. Karunaman, who was known as Vinayak Murthy Muralidharan. So he like during his propaganda and all, he used a lot of anti-Muslim speeches. And also in the northern part of the country, also we observe a lot of speeches against caste, particular caste. So like there are a lot of candidates, parliamentary candidates, and a lot of those candidates were targeted based on their caste identity. And also in the central part of the country, the minister, Mr. Chandrasekhar, the fisheries minister of the country, he's from the Malay community, and he was targeted for his identity in the north part of the country. So he's very active in the north part of the country. He is handling the issues with regard to the fishermen, the Indian trawlers entering the Sri Lankan water and stuff like that. but he was targeted based on his identity, the Malay community. So this is something we observed. And also during the elections period, also, as Tusinda also mentioned, there were a lot of online gender-based violence against women candidates. And then during the presidential candidate, the current Prime Minister the current Prime Minister was targeted. And then also the other candidates from like all the districts across, even in north, south, and east part of the country, and some Muslim women were also targeted based on their identity. And also during the silence period, during the cooling period, this is something that we share in all the conferences and all. During the silence periods, there are a lot of Indian influences, Indian media influences, particularly during the presidential election. During the silence period, there was like big mainstream media from South India, Tandi TV. Tandi TV. So what they did was they broadcasted an interview of Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe during the silence period. So in this period, no any campaigns can be done. But as you know, like in the north and east part of the country, most of the people follow South Indian media. And Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe's interview was telecasted on Tandi TV and in their YouTube channel, which has 10 million subscribers. So it's a very big media. So that's also something that we observed during the presidential election. And also, there are also a lot of influence from like India also. Like we see a lot of Hindu extremist content coming in from India. These are like generated from India, and those are like those are sponsored in northeast and central part of the country. So this is also something that we observed. And some particular candidates were promoted during the parliamentary elections. Some candidates were promoted through those accounts with their identity, the Hinduism and things like that. And also we saw a lot of religious-based hate speeches, particularly Christians were targeted. Some particularly in the western part of the country, there are a lot of hate speeches against Christian candidates during the parliamentary election. And also, like as everyone mentioned, there are a lot of violations against the election law and the media guidelines. For example, there were use of children in their campaign. So we saw a lot of post and video where children were used for the election campaigns. So this is something that we observed during both the parliamentary and the presidential elections. So some religious sites were used for election propaganda, and the children were used for election propaganda. And then the donations were given to the people, and the pictures of them were taken and uploaded on social media, and Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. So this is something that we frequently observe during the time. And also there are a lot of polls and predictions, unofficial polls and predictions that we observed during the silence period. And then on the election day also, this is something that happened during the presidential election. On the election day, during the vote counting, there were a lot of unofficial results. Fake results were also shared. And also there are a lot of disinformation to stop voters to go to the polling stations. So for example, there were also videos of Aragalaya was shared saying that this incident is happened somewhere in Nigambo or somewhere. So there were old videos of there were also old videos of violent incidents that happened in Sri Lanka, and that was shared shared with the caption saying that this incident is happening in the particular polling station. And also the NPP's, the current government's past history, like JVP insurrections and stuff like that, were also shared, saying that this government will come and they will do the same thing that they did during the 1880s, that they did during the JVP insurrection and things like that. So those also something that we observed during the during both the elections. And also there were a lot of coordinated inauthentic behavior, we call it CIA, where like a lot of fake letters, like with the letterhead of NPP, fake letters were shared saying sex work will be legalized in Sri Lanka by NPP. So this, I'm just giving an example. A lot of fake letters with NPP's letterhead were widely shared, and also they have a lot of disinformation claiming that there will be the social media will be um, restricted for like the coming 1 week or things like that. So those also were shared. So this can like create fear among the voters and stop voters from going to the polling station and do votings. So these are some of the to answer your questions, like there will be always like perpetrators and bad actors, like anywhere, like physically or online. Even 1,000 years later, there will be bad actors somewhere. So what we can do is we can do more advocacy on how we can counter disinformation. How we can now with the AI coming into play, that there will be a lot of AI generated content. Even during the parliamentary and presidential election, we saw few AI generated content, but that are like more obvious. Like we can, when we see it, we can say that it's an AI generated content. But still, like with the mass growing AI tools, like there will be a lot of AI content that cannot be identified by like ordinary people. So we need more awareness among people on how to counter disinformation and things like that. So that's something that's necessary to counter all these harmful narratives by those perpetrators and things like that. But in the local government election also, like we saw a lot of this is like local election, and like even small candidates, like they were also targeted. They are private pictures, they are sometimes morphed images of them were shared. Mostly women candidates were targeted. The morphed pictures of them were shared, and then their private messages, their personal identity card numbers, passport numbers, even their uh, personal profile, the screenshots of the personal profile with their children, with their family, and all of them was shared. So we got a lot of reports from all the districts, and we also monitored a lot of. We also did monitoring manually, because these are like individual accounts. Some individual accounts also they create harmful speeches and they just put it out there. So private account in the sense like the accounts that we normally use, like these are like not like pages or groups, but like the accounts with public post and things like that. So there also we see a lot of harmful speeches, but it's with our tools, with the current tools that we have, it's very difficult for us to track those private accounts. I mean, private in the sense those posts are public, but like individual accounts, we can call it individual accounts. So it's very difficult for us to follow those accounts, and with the limitations that we have with the tools, that monitoring tools that we have, it's very difficult for us to you know monitor those accounts. But still, like we try our best to do monitor those accounts and find those content that target women candidates and women activists and people like that. So I think I have covered most of the harmful narratives that were online during the presidential and parliamentary elections. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. I mean, sharing the reflections on how you did the observation and what are the key findings. Maybe later we can also discuss about. I think one of the most important aspect that the platform accountability, right? Because I know many groups that observe the elections, including social hashtag generation. So really try to coordinate with the most of these platform like Meta or Google, or like, but it's really hard sometimes to ensure the platform take down those post harmful narratives on time. That's one of the biggest issue I think all of us are facing. Maybe later we can discuss and talk about this. Before then, I would like to bring the Dr. Jehan also to the discussion to bring more human rights perspective when it comes to the elections. I I remember earlier the Manjesh has mentioned that um, there are a lot of groups that still cannot really exercise their franchise. For example, the people who are in the abroad, and then the people who actually have some important work during the election day. Likewise, there are a lot of groups that still we cannot ensure their participation, even though Sri Lanka has ratified or signed to many different international human rights mechanisms. For example, as far as I remember, like when it comes to the recommendations coming from Human Rights Commission, the first time Human Rights Commission had made a recommendation to the Ministry of Foreign Labor to activate the rights of the people who are in abroad in 2006. And then multiple times after that also the recommendation has made from different the advocacy groups, including the Human Rights Commission, but it was not really been materialized yet. So why this bean is so slow, and then what we can like do when it comes to really materialize these recommendations at the end of the day, to ensure every person in Sri Lanka have a right to vote.
Thank you very much, Taridu. I can be heard clearly.
Yes,
All
we can
right,
hear
great.
you.
I must say it's a real honor to address everyone here today, and I must start by congratulating ANFREL on the publication of this very important report. I will be briefly touching on the very important issue of the right to vote. And I might start by just suggesting that it is not merely a procedural formality. The right to vote has to be understood really as a means by which any individual can really express their political will, hold leaders accountable, and shape their society and their communities in the future. I think it is important to recognize that the right to vote is very much guaranteed both domestic law and international law. So under Article 3 and Article 14, 4E of the Sri Lankan Constitution, this right is very much recognized. Apart from that, the right is bolstered by Sri Lanka's international legal commitments. If I would mention a couple of examples, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, very much recognizes this right under Article 25, which guarantees to every citizen the right to participate in public affairs and also vote in genuine periodic elections. Then, if you think of CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, it commits Sri Lanka to eliminate discrimination against women in political and public life, including the right to vote and be elected. Um, Let me note that due to a variety of developments over the years, Sri Lanka has actually incrementally graduated from being a country that once uh, routinely featured election violence to a country that I think only occasionally sees acts of physical violence. Although we've heard from other panelists that other forms of violence, particularly online, continue today, and we are confronted with new challenges. But I think the gradual decrease of physical violence during elections since the early 2000s can be attributed to many, many things. But I would be remiss not to acknowledge the role played by election monitors in this regard. I think organizations such as PAFREL, CMEV, uh, and indeed ANFREL have played a very important role in ensuring largely non-violent elections in Sri Lanka during recent times. So while Sri Lanka has made important strides in the right direction, uh, the lived reality for many Sri Lankans falls short of ideal standards. And we have to confront this uncomfortable truth that the right to vote in Sri Lanka is not yet fully inclusive. So this afternoon, I would like to discuss 4 groups for whom this right is still fragile and I would say inaccessible, and outline how we at the Human Rights Commission are trying to make a change in this regard. And quite rightly, it was pointed out that this is a long-standing campaign. It began many, many years ago, and progress has been very, very slow. And the current commission is attempting to make some progress by engaging the relevant actors. The first group are prisoners. So there is no provision in Sri Lankan law that explicitly prohibits all incarcerated persons from voting. But in practice, all incarcerated persons, both those awaiting trial, those convicted of very minor offenses, they are effectively disenfranchised. So in response, the Human Rights Commission has initiated a sort of policy dialogue with the Election Commission and prison authorities in the hope of advocating for mechanisms to allow particularly remand prisoners and eligible convicts to vote, whether through some form of postal ballots or special polling stations in these facilities. These are not radical proposals. They actually reflect a growing global consensus that citizenship does not end at the prison gate, that prisoners also have a right to vote. The second group are workers in special economic zones. Now, these zones are home to thousands of internal migrant workers within Sri Lanka. And these individuals often live in hostels or temporary accommodations very far from their home electoral districts. So due to very rigid voter registration requirements, these workers also frequently lose the opportunity to exercise their franchise. And the Commission is looking to initiate a broader dialogue with the Election Commission and the Ministry of Labour to work together to ensure that voter registration actually covers these zones. And we have recommended that flexible mechanisms such as mobile registration units and temporary polling stations can be used to enable these workers to vote without facing undue hardship. The third group is the Malayaha Tamil community. The Malayaha Tamil community, or the Hill Country Tamil community, are descendants of Indian origin plantation workers. And this community has faced long struggles in terms of systemic barriers to citizenship and documentation. While a number of these legal issues have been addressed in recent times, the legacy of exclusion, I'm afraid, persists today. And a significant number of members of this community still face difficulties in terms of obtaining birth certificates, national identity cards, registration of their permanent addresses, all of these which are seen as prerequisites for voter registration. So the Commission, through its regional offices, I was just at one of these events a couple of weeks ago, has attempted to engage the relevant authorities through outreach programs to assist these individuals from the community in terms of navigating the documentation process. So in collaboration with local authorities, the Commission has facilitated, for example, mobile NIC services and encouraged estate managers to support employees in formalizing their resident record, so they can have some kind of address that can enable voter registration. But we do feel that there are some structural problems that might require legislative reforms. For example, the Registration of Electors Act needs to be amended to recognize alternative forms of proof of residence, particularly in communities where traditional home ownership records are absent. Sri Lankans employed abroad is the fourth category. I think according to some estimates, there are around 3 million Sri Lankans working overseas, and there was a steady increase in this number in recent times. And these this community contributes significantly to the Sri Lankan economy through their remittances. So they are very much part of the Sri Lankan economy, yet they remain largely disenfranchised, as our electoral laws do not permit postal voting from abroad, nor do these laws facilitate absentee balloting at consulates or embassies. And this is, as mentioned before, this is a long-standing problem, and recommendations have come from the Human Rights Commission almost 20 years ago. So the Commission is in the process of continuing to engage relevant authorities to actually explore feasible postal and electronic voting mechanisms for Sri Lankan citizens abroad, taking lessons from other democracies that have successfully enfranchised their diaspora populations. And I think with new technology, the challenges that may have been faced 20 years ago can be overcome. So there is scope for reform, and there is a need to sort of energize this process to enable those very important citizens that are living and working very hard overseas to actually be part of the electoral process. Apart from that, the Human Rights Commission has taken certain steps in recent times to defend the right to vote. For instance, during the 2024 presidential and parliamentary elections, the Commission established a dedicated mechanism to receive and investigate complaints related to the elections. Now, this was done in a manner that doesn't overstep the remit of the Human Rights Commission and step on the toes of the Election Commission, that has a very specific mandate in terms of looking into electoral law violations. This was more in terms of the violation of the right to vote and also, of course, the right to equality and the equal protection of the law. So the Commission set up hotlines, local inquiry desks, rapid response teams in an effort to address some of these human rights violations that took place in the context of the election. Of course, the Commission will continue to engage in high-level dialogues with the Election Commission and advocate for inclusive electoral practices. And our recent discussions have emphasized the need to at least pilot prison voting in certain institutions during the next election cycle, and to adopt more inclusive registration processes for the marginalized communities I mentioned. So let me conclude by saying this. Ultimately, democracy is not measured by how easily the powerful, the fluent can vote. It is measured by whether or not the most vulnerable communities, those at the margins, can vote with equal ease and dignity. So while Sri Lanka has made significant progress in recent years, the next phase of the journey is actually the fulfillment of the right to vote for everyone, to ensure that no Sri Lankan, whether in prison, or whether on a plantation, whether living abroad, or in a factory in a special economic zone, is actually left voiceless. And I'll pause there, and I'm happy to engage in the question and answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your reflections. Yes, I think, as you rightly mentioned, it's not just in Sri Lanka, right? Like this challenge has been facing the other countries as well. But we also see when it comes to the other regional practices, many other countries also try to find solutions. For example, as you mentioned about the electronic voting, Philippines has piloted their first time in the last month election, the first time in Asia to enfranchise their communities abroad to the electronic voting. So if you look at the other democracies across the region, like when it comes to prisons, when it comes to those marginalized communities, people who are working in the special economic zones, there are a lot of practices that we as Sri Lanka we can adapt, and then to move forward to make everyone included at the end of the day in the electoral process. So as election observers, as international observers, citizen observers, human rights commission and different other advocacy groups, that we make ton of recommendations after each and every election. But finally it has to go through the parliament. The parliament is the place where you can change the laws, make new laws. So they have the ultimate the power to do this thing. So how we can really work together with the policymakers, the parliamentarians, as civil society, as international community, to make sure these reforms at the end of the day materialize. I would like to hear from Manjula. We cannot hear you. I think you are on mute.
Now, okay, no?
Yes.
Thank you so much, ANFREL. It really feels like you always treat releasing a final report and sharing your recommendations as a key part of your work. And that's so important. These two elections have truly changed our electoral history. ANFREL has observed many elections before, but honestly, if you hadn't been part of this one, it would have been like missing out on the main event. There are several reasons behind this. One big reason is that, especially in Sri Lanka, people used to believe that you couldn't get a two-third majority under the proportional representation system. But the last parliamentary election proved that idea wrong. Another key point is that for the first time in our country's history, we had a president elected without actually having a clear majority. He wasn't backed by any major political party or movement. He won through second preference vote. So, Tarindu, as you mentioned, reform sounds like a great and attractive word, very appealing. But as a fellow Sri Lankan, you will understand this saying from our culture, Balagiri Dosha, right? It basically means if something going to happen, it will happen eventually, right? But much later. That pretty much sums up our history with reforms. Not just in elections, but in every sector should be reformed. Let me give you a small example. One key improvement that made our elections one key improvement in our election history actually that made our that election Sri Lankan election system is more fairer was making the national identity card mandatory. But guess what? The idea for that came all the way back in 1959. Our father was just 10 years old then, and it finally became law in 2006, 47 years later. At the time, my father passed away. By then, our father had already passed away, and if he were still alive, he would have been 57. That is how long reform can take here, can take place here. You know that electoral reform is really tough. There's even a popular saying about it. Democracy means equal votes for people who think very differently. That says a lot, doesn't it? Karantu, let me add a few thoughts in response to your question. Maybe not in detail, but at least from a numbers point of view, we have actually gone through three big phases of electoral reform so far. The first major step was setting up a parliamentary select committee back in 2003, which continued until 2007. Former Minister Dinesh Gunawardena was headed that particular parliamentary select committee. Then in 2015, we saw the creation of Election Commission. After that, a second parliamentary select committee report came out starting in 2021. And we also had a special presidential commission led by former Chief Justice Presidential Counsel Priyasad Deb. In between all this, there were other efforts and steps taken, but none of them managed to completely overhaul or fix the electoral system the way really need. That said, we have made some progress. Looking back, it is clear that while we have come a certain distance, there's still a long road ahead. Now, speaking from my long experience in this field, I want to highlight something important. While we still have a lot of reforms to work on, I think 2024 is a very significant year in the history of Sri Lankan elections. We have managed to hold two major elections this year, and surprisingly, they happened without any of significant incident that harmed to the election process of both the elections. What is the special is that despite all the gaps in our reform process, we still managed to conduct two well-run elections. Also, I have read both reports and all the recommendations made by ANFREL. They are very valuable. One point that stood out to me as how much importance you placed on regulating election expenditure. You may recall similar recommendations were made during the 2019 presidential election and 2020 parliamentary elections too. The European Union highlighted this same issue as well. Now the difference is we actually have a law in place to regulate these expenses. So finally, we have a foundation to bring about real change. Tarandu, based on everything we have discussed, I would like to share a message for our policy makers. First, holding free and fair election doesn't just improve democracy. It also strengthens our political culture and boosts our image, both within Sri Lanka and internationally. Policymakers need to understand that a well-managed electoral reform process can help elevate our country's standing, even when we compare ourselves with others on cultural and social terms. Second, we shouldn't design electoral systems just to help us win. Political power isn't permanent. Those in government today won't always be in charge. So political leaders need to think long term and understand how systems evolve over time. Third, we need to be clear about our priorities. When it comes to reform, if I were to take this forward, here's how I would line things up. First, we need to an alternative voting system that makes it easier for all citizens. Already, Dr. Gihan explained regarding the voting rights of prisoners and even out of country votings and other aspects, especially those who face difficulties to cast their votes. We have to prioritize, introduce an alternative voting mechanism method. Second, the election commission should be given more authority. But before we push for that, we should ask them directly, are you ready to take on that responsibility? Right? There's a doubt on my mind that on that point also. If we can make progress on these two fronts first, everything else will fall into place more easily. But here's the main point for policymakers. If you are going to push for reforms, do it when there's no election around the corner. Otherwise, there's a big risk they will just use it as an excuse to keep postponing elections. Those are my very few points. However, you know that Taridu, to sum up this my brief idea, you know how politicians always shout in Sri Lanka after the end of at the end of all the political rallies, Jaya Veva, which means victory. Well, I want to say the same to all of you at ANFREL. Jai Veva. Victory to you too.
Yeah, victory to all of us who are on the election work. And then, like our real victory will come, I think, when all those reforms actually take in place in the country. I think, as you correctly mentioned, it's a good time right now to work on the reforms, because we already, within very short a period of time, that we already finished three elections, including two national elections, so that we may have quite a long period to work on these reforms. I think as international observers, citizen observer groups, and then the other advocacy group, including the Human Rights Commission, I think it's also our responsibility. Our time also has come to really to work with the policymakers to make this happen, right? I think thank you very much, all of your reflections. We think we can go a round of questions and answers. I think I would like to invite all the panelists to open their camera and then join the discussion. Let me first give opportunity to Manjesh, our uh, senior program officer for international election observation, to ask couple of questions from all of you.
Thanks, Harindu. Uh, can we also request the other participants if they want to join the live streaming? Like, I believe there are some other participants as well from PAFREL as well as hashtag. If they want to be part of this Q&A session, then I would request them also to join the live discussion. So, yes, welcome, Indika.
Hi, thank you very much, ANFREL, for giving your releasing your two election reports, which was concluded last year, and appreciate PAFREL as a civil domestic election monitoring organization that your presence was very highlighted in Sri Lankan elections more than 3 decades now. It was a very confidence given that the both candidates and voters that they are franchise they are voting at the elections in every elections. As PAFREL now and domestic election group, I would like to suggest that ANFREL, that your team to share with that your reports, both reports with the stakeholders, especially election commission, police, and mainly that human rights commission. Now one of our commissioners there is fortunately now we can hear that good news from that commission side, and to push them to implement some recommendations, especially that advanced voting system is on that as Dr. Gehan mentions, that who are left from that voting on the election day. I think I would like to suggest to the ANFREL team to share with that the reports with the relevant stakeholders, especially mentioning the findings and the recommendations that should be in place in the future elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Indika. Over to you, Manjesh.
Tharindu, I just noticed that we have someone from Election Commission of Sri Lanka as well. So I would like to welcome Mr. Rizan M.A. Hamid, who is the coordinating secretary to the chairperson, Election Commission of Sri Lanka. And I think he has joined us from the secretariat. Rizan, do you want to say anything? Maybe you can also switch your video on so that we can also see you.
It's good to join with you at the moment. And Manjesh, Dr. Manjesh, you happen to mention that the religious institutions are being utilized as polling stations. It is true that, but because these religious institutions or Buddha viharas or Buddhist sermon halls, that has enough capacity to accommodate polling station. This is one of the reasons, and because of the close proximity of the locality, and for the availability and accessibility only we use this, because we take efforts in I mean we are utilizing government public institutions like school halls and all, but when it comes to that, rather than that, the Buddhist viharas can be found in the ground, closer to ground level sometimes. So depending on the availability only we use is not to jeopardize or not to discriminate among communities. Or these community halls or the preaching halls are accessible by any persons of any community. They need to wear strict mandatory rules of entering a temple or place of worship. It's completely different. That is there. And when it comes to accessibility, Sri Lanka has a different I mean, when it comes to geography or locations, when it comes to central part of Sri Lanka, you find some of the polling stations are located in an elevated ground rather, because you can't level the mountain to bring the polling station down, but make sure that whatever the access we could provide, likewise a three-wheeler could come to the top, and from there, can could transport the water to the polling station without any hazard, and such measures have been taken. And also ramps also have been constructed wherever possible, and everything is made to ensure that persons with disabilities are also included in the voting process. As you know, that as you mentioned in your discussion, as a pilot project, we could introduce those who, separate kind of identification identification for those who are mobility whose mobility is affected, or vision or hearing or impaired, so that they will be easily recognized, and so that and you know very well, you know that we have trained our polling staff to communicate with the persons with hearing or speech impaired persons. So that was also another milestone, and also the tactile ballot that has been introduced. But you will understand, when it comes to the presidential election, the entire country becomes an constitute. And whereas when it comes to regional and local, and when it comes to, then you will find umpteenth number of candidates in a local authority election, where we find it very difficult to provide such required devices to enable the um, visually impaired persons to vote. I think that's it from me of what I had heard, and it was a commendable election. I don't know how far you commend it from your end. It's true that you may suggest umpteenth number of recommendations, whereas it's like it's very difficult to implement. Like Manjala Gajanayak said, Balagiri Dose means it is something that you procrastinate things, and that was in effect after 37 years. So likewise, we do not know how effective. Anyway, we also have been, election commission has been taking measures to write to the sectoral committees of electoral reforms in the certain things like out of the country voting, and inclusion of even this increasing of women participation in the electoral bodies. Those are the things that we had been doing. We had been, and the most recent comment about Sri Lankan election was from the United Nations resident representative, Mark Henry France. He said it's very, other states, other countries in the region, or even the Western world, should follow Sri Lankan as an example of how effectively they conduct elections in a transparent, credible, and um, um, free and fair manner. And whereas the so-called other nations in the region or the Western world find struggle to convince the general public to come and vote. Okay, that's it from me.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Manjev, just to intervene regarding what Mr. Rizan said, actually, that the one point that out of 13,000 odd polling stations, Sri Lankan Election Commissions is using, I think, nearly maybe 900 polling station as, temples as polling stations. There were some complaints against such very few, against some temples. As far as I know, Election Commission took some measures to remove those polling stations, actually temples. Then they have removed them. If there's no complaint towards such polling stations only, actually they have used. Then I just wanted to tell that the Election Commission has taken some measures regarding that.
Yes. Also,
Institutions. And in areas where you get, say for an example, where there is a larger majority of other communities prevalent in that area. We strictly try to avoid temples because they find it very inconvenient to visit the temples to vote.
Okay, and I will also would like to bring the earlier question that the thing that we discuss about the social media and the platform accountability. So I think I heard from the many stakeholders, including the election commission, and also the other observer groups. It was really hard task to communicate with these social media companies like Meta or Google when it comes to take down some of the violations of election law. So how do you see this as an issue, and then like what are the measures as international observers and civil society that we can do when it comes to make sure that these platforms are really accountable uh, uh, for the content that they are having in their platforms? I think anyone would can answer who would like to. I remember earlier Joy and then Tusit also have mentioned about it.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I answer this question. So, um, in the previous three elections, also like we closely worked with those social media companies, Facebook, Meta, TikTok, and YouTube, and Google. So what we basically did was we did the monitoring and we sent the complaints to the election commission, and then election commission was closely working with the platforms, the social media companies, and they were sending the complaints. They also have a mechanism to filter those content, and they send their reports to those social media companies. And what they said was like even Rizan also can add on it. Meta was compared to the previous elections in the previous years. Meta was more responsive than the Google. I think in an event, someone representing election commission said Google sometimes never responded to their complaints and all. But TikTok is like sometimes TikTok remove whatever we send, so they are like more responsive to compared to Face Meta. But now in the past two elections, they are like bit more responsive than in the elections in the previous year. But I think after with the current community standard uh, um, that has been renewed after Mr. Trump's election, also like there are a lot of changes in their policy in their community standard and all. So now, like we also like trusted hashtag is also a trusted partners of Meta, and we also send complaints. Sometimes they remove content, sometimes they don't, saying that it does not violate their community standard. For example, there was a picture of Sri Lankan map with the north and east part of the country where donkeys were placed there. Like pictures of donkeys were in the north and east part of the country, saying that it happened during the presidential election after the votes were counted, where like the northern part of the country people voted for Sajid Premadasa and the rest of the country voted for Mr. Anuda Kumar Dissanayake. So after that, a picture was depicted and it was shared, widely shared, got a lot of shares. So we kept, kept appealing, kept sending those posts to Meta, but they didn't remove it, saying that it does not violate their community standard. So there are a lot of gaps in taking down those content and stuff. But they respond to our complaints and all, but sometimes they don't take any actions against such posts. So I think as all the civil society organizations and election commission and other CSOs also have to work closely with the social media companies to make them accountable, especially when it comes to election. Because there are a lot of, even some social media, for example, WhatsApp was used to spread. So WhatsApp we can't monitor. There's like private messages, and a lot of messages were forwarded many times to among users to create fear among the voters. So I think this is something that we have to work on. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I give you one point also?
Yes.
I think the platform issue, the lack of response by the platforms is not necessarily a Sri Lankan issue, but more or less it has been observed in especially in the global south. So, for example, I think when it come to the local elections, they clearly said that they are not interested because this is not a national election. So it is a multifaceted issue where we have to coordinate and collaborate with each other, not only in Sri Lanka, not only with the election commission, but with the election commission. Of course they can collaborate with the other election authorities of global south, like Fembosa. They could get together and have a united voice. Then the platforms will respond. They respond to the numbers, they respond to the profit margins. uh, so we have to be creative. So that is one point. And the other point is, can we yes, we cannot take down the false narratives. Can we counter them? Can we counter them time in a timely manner? Can we counter them outside the social media? It is sometimes the offenses are not necessarily, not only social media offenses. They are anonymous information. They are obstructing someone's privacy. So can we have a legal system to that? That is also a option.
Yes. Thank you very much for your reflections. And Dr. Manjesh, you want to ask a couple of questions? Yes, you can go ahead. We cannot hear you.
You can hear me, right? Yeah, it's like sugar level in a diabetic patient and a non-diabetic patient. Because whereas in a diabetic patient, sugar level is very high, and a non-diabetic patient is fairly low. So you can't compare those situations. So it's applicable to in relation to the countries where the elections are happening, and the toxic level of the comment or whatever made in the social media. And election commission also taking measures to mitigate issues that are going to arise with the as a result of artificial intelligence, and the impact of social media also will be mitigated, because Sri Lankan Election Commission is empowered with some donor support from some organizations. TRI, EU, Factum, and others have contributed in provision of some equipments to strengthen and empower the institution. And we will, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Rizan. We really appreciate all the comments and feedback from ECSL as well. And but we have limitation with time, and there are a couple of questions that the speakers need to take right away. And but before going to the speakers and before going to these short questions, I think it's again important for ANFREL to reiterate that we are very happy with how peacefully and how organized these elections were, and we always appreciate the effective and positive role of Election Commission of Sri Lanka for this. And when it comes to reforms, like including the venues, or like the participation of the disenfranchised groups, or even the persons with disabilities or elderlies, or all these issues. We know that Sri Lanka and the Election Commission both have come a long way, but there is always this scope of improvement, because democracy is always a work in progress. So we know that, these are the lessons that we learned in this election. And of course, you started this pilot project, but we understand that, this also needs to be did now, so that all the persons with disabilities can be covered, or also get the benefits. So as I said, we are all work in progress, and we also feel that, uh, elections of the religion, it should never be mixed. So all we wanted to say was that, it's not the best practice. We understand the infrastructure hurdles as well, and we have definitely improved. The improvement was seen even between two elections, presidential and parliamentary elections. But now I would like to go to the other speakers, which were like the part of the panel. And the couple of questions that I have in mind is, the first question I have is with the Human Rights Commissioner, Dr. Jehan Gunatilleke. And my question is that, what are the efforts of Human Rights Commission with regard to gender and sexual minorities? Like, ANFREL also reached out to transgender community and other LGBT communities as well. So how is Human Rights Commission taking care of that? And my second question is to all the panelists. Maybe this will also be the conclusion of this entire discussion that we had. Which are the most important and practical reforms which you want, all the CSOs and all of us to push together? So can you just identify just one, not two, just one reform which is both important as well as practical, because some reforms are also very long term. It might take longer than expected. So our efforts might be, futile. Like, Manjula also shared one of his experiences about such reform. So what do you think would be the most important reform which might not take long? And this is something that we should start pushing forward to. So maybe we can start with Dr. Gomez.
Thanks, Manjesh, for that question. Is your question in relation to steps taken with respect to election rights, or more generally? Because maybe I can spend some time on what we have been doing in that regard. But was your question limited to the right to vote, or more general?
Dr. Gunadilike, for this context, my question was limited to the electoral participation,
Right,
because we
right.
understand that, just to give you a context and example,
Yeah.
in India, the third gender or the transgender community has also been extended official ID cards. So for the electoral purpose as well, it's clearly mentioned in their voter ID cards. But
Got it, got it. Yeah.
again, it is only limited to transgenders as of now. But in Sri Lanka, it's only in binary. So my question was related to the electoral participation.
Sure. So, wherever there is a barrier to electoral participation as a result of any kind of change in the documentation that a person might have, um, the general advocacy on documentation might be of relevance, right? So the Human Rights Commission has been advocating for um, birth certificate renewals, because right now what happens in practice is that the birth certificate, when there is a change, it's just a notation on the certificate, which means that a person can always look at it and identify the fact that the person is a transgender person, right? As opposed to a new birth certificate being issued. And the Human Rights Commission has been engaging in a dialogue with the relevant authorities in terms of whether there can be a new certificate issued. So I imagine that this can be an issue also within the electoral process, if someone has transitioned and the relevant documentation only reflects the old identity of the person as opposed to the transitioned identity. I must say that this is an area that the Human Rights Commission has room for improvement, because it is an area that we need to be more specific on. So to answer your more direct question, has the Human Rights Commission taken steps specifically in this regard? The answer is no. And I think it's an area that the Human Rights Commission has to take very seriously. We have been doing a lot of work in terms of improvements with respect to how transgender persons are treated in police stations, and we had a breakthrough recently with the IGP actually issuing an internal circular reflecting the Human Rights Commission's guidelines amongst all police stations. And I think that was a very important step in the right direction in terms of societal recognition of this community. But I think we need to take it now to the next level and also look at specific problems that this community might face in the electoral process. So thanks for the question, and I think a lot of reflection required on our part.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gunathilake, for being honest about it and for acknowledging that this is an important area where lots of work still needs to be done. And maybe the rest of the speakers can answer the second question now, that what would be the most important and practical reform which we should. And just one reform should be enough, just one from each one of you.
Maybe
Since
Manjula,
others,
you can go
yeah,
first.
since others, yeah, thanks. So yeah, as I mentioned in my short note, actually presentation, then it is definitely we need to introduce an alternative method for voting. Otherwise, it should be prioritized. If you can see the records in 2020 during parliamentary election, there were nearly 4 million voters were totally disfranchised, right? Honestly, they have voting rights, but unfortunately, they don't have much facilities, including out of country voting. But before that, before moving to provide facilities for out of country migrant workers and other Sri Lankans, actually, we should have arranged something to vote for local people. Then election monitors. I'm not saying in this other local platform this, but you know that honestly I have not voted since 2005. If I am going to my home to vote, then it will take more than 2 or 3 hours. Then our election operation will be disarray. That's the problem. Then election observers like us, then journalists, and there are many persons. You know that wedding arrangement in one day. I collected data. There may be over 400 wedding arrangements on a particular day, that normal average. Okay, then 800 people will be excluded from the process. I got some information on any day. You know that there will be more than 50,000 people out of the country attending to Dambadiva Charika in India pilgrimage, right? Even such things. Then I submitted the RTI application to the prison of Sri Lanka. Actually, they told me that they have replied that over 22,000 remanded prisoners were there. Same things when it comes to the hospital. Also, you know that when it comes to the government hospital, there are over 100,000 beds, 105,000 beds. Out of those, actually, on any average day, there will be over 22,000 patients. Then how they are voting? Then my understanding is, if there's a willingness to election commission and other authorities, it is a simple thing to do. Now already election commission has taken some actions to provide over 5,000 identity cards for persons with disabilities. Then if there's a willingness and the joint mechanism, actually they can touch other most relevant sectors also, without concerning on out of country voting. There should be a secondary demand. Then in that way, my honest idea is that actually before implementing any other election reform, we should introduce an alternative mechanism to vote for everyone.
Can I go next?
Yes, Sapit.
Okay, so I second Manjula. Yeah, yes, we have to have the most important and most practical is the alternative voting, having to have alternative voting methods as well as advanced voting. That will be the most practical one. But could I go a step further? And if we can imagine voting right, the right to vote as a fundamental right in Sri Lanka, then it can be a overarching fundamental right of a citizen, where we could work many things. We can intertwine many things to there. So it has some legal provisions in the court. It has been proven, I think, twice that it is a fundamental right of any Sri Lankan, but we don't have it in our constitution. So it is, maybe it's not the most doable thing at the moment, but it has to happen.
I think
Maybe
for
we can go to Tusita now.
yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Yes, Joy.
So I'm not an expert in law, but still, like there are a lot of as I mentioned in my discussion also, like there are a lot of Indian influence. Indian media is influencing in the country, particularly during the election, and also Russian accounts are there, Chinese accounts are there, Chinese accounts are there. So maybe what I can suggest is maybe we can do some sort of regulations to regulate those foreign media companies. I'm not sure whether it's practical or not, but still, like there are a lot of violations by these media channels, media companies from India. So maybe any sort of regulations for. So I was discussing it with the Sri Lankan media press also. So what they were saying is this telecommunication, for example, this dialogue, and then this Sri Lanka Telecom, this channel, this network can regulate their broadcasting during the election time and things like that. So I'm not sure whether it can be done or not, but maybe something on this line can be helpful, particularly during the election.
Thank you so much. Maybe Dr. Jehan, you can also add.
Nothing further to add, except perhaps I think we do need some very clear guidelines in terms of disinformation. And I think engaging platforms is not an easy task because we're looking at much, much more powerful institutions, sometimes more powerful than states. And the propensity of these institutions actually listening to a small country's election commission or civil society is very low. And I think we need to reflect on some lost opportunities in the past where we got quite close to getting together many players in the industry and coming up with a code of conduct that was going to be largely self-regulating, but also with accountability mechanism with independent monitoring. We came quite close to having an industry code of practice that didn't materialize, largely owing to the fact that the government of the time decided to bring in an online safety act. and that resulted in those negotiations breaking down. I think today we would be probably having better dialogue with these large, powerful institutions had we managed to get them on board with a code of practice. So, something to reflect on for the future in terms of a reality check as far as how we can get these platforms to respond. I think resuscitating that conversation about industry code of practice is a good thing to consider.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gunathilika. And I must say that all of you have really noted and identified and shared some of the most important as well as practical reforms with us. And now it's the team job. All of us have to push for all of these important reforms in the coming days. And given how vibrant the CSO network of Sri Lanka is, this is like one of the best learnings for ANFREL as well. And we always reiterate this wherever we go. We always give Sri Lanka as example that how vibrant and how active its CSOs network is, and they have always been very proactive even when it comes to pushing for these reforms. So over to Tharindu now to conclude the discussion and to close the event. And thank you so much from my side and from Anfrel's side. It has been a pleasure to have you as panelists. So over to you, Tharindu.
Yes, thank you very much. We had a very long discussion actually, like including the launch. But finally, I mean, like before closing this today's online event. So again, I would like to invite all of you. You can visit our ANFREL website and then also our social media platforms, so that you can read the entire election observation report that ANFREL produced. Also share with the other the people who are interested in these reforms. So, and also invite all the other actors that we can hopefully work together to make sure that these reforms are finally happen actually in the ground. Again, thank you very much to Upekshi, Tusita, Joy, Dr. Gehan, Manjula, and all other friends, the colleagues who joined with us today to reflect your experience and discuss about the potential reforms that can really take place in Sri Lanka. Looking forward to work with you, all of you, in the future to make the Sri Lankan elections better. Thank you very much again, and then see you soon.
And just like I just wanted to share that the copies of the reports are on their way. We try to make sure that it reaches you before this launch event, but then we had some troubles at the courier end. So the guy is still at the customs. So I think there are issues. But as a token of appreciation, you'll be getting the copies of both the reports soon. So thank you so much, Akin. Thank you, Tarindu.
Yeah, with that, we will end today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.